Quantum computing is really good at solving very, very complex problems. But these problems don't need to be very big in size. Whereas GPUs, for example, you can feed a lot of parameters through the GPUs. And this is how these two technologies complement each other. And we are integrating quite heavily our quantum computers in data centers into kind of GPU and CPU-based compute.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining the Boredom Club today to another episode. My name is Yossi Garmazi, and I'm joined also by a good friend of mine, Jason Wolf. Jason.
Hi, great to be here. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Looking forward to this one.
So today we are fortunate enough to interview none other than Jan Goetz, co-founder and CEO of IQM Quantum Computers, a company that revolutionizing the quantum world by building full-stack quantum computer designed for real-world industrial use. So Jan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks a lot for having me. I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
The pleasure is ours. So Jan, I want to start with a quick question, a little bit about your background, because you actually started your career in the academia and then you moved to the quantum world. But interestingly enough, you started a company back in 2019, long before quantum got the momentum that we see now, right? But I was just like curious if you can tell us, why did you believe that quantum computing could become a real business rather than just, sort of like a research field, a very much promising one, but still a research?
Well, I think the use cases, they have always been there, and people have been talking about chemical simulations and development of new pharmaceuticals and optimization and code breaking and all of this. But the technology on the hardware side was just not there. And this means that a lot of groups around the world have been developing the technology really in an academic university setup. And at that time, it became clear that first prototypes were working in a way that you can run first algorithms on very small and very noisy machines, but nevertheless, you could get results out of it. And then it was clear that if you want to be leading in this kind of global race, you would not do it in a university setup, because universities are good at pushing science and maybe developing certain components and elements. But if you think about system thinking, system engineering, scaling, building products, all of this is not anymore the job for the universities, but this is the job of industry. And this is when we decided to spin out the company to do exactly this: scale the technology, productize it, and commercialize it.
Absolutely. And it's indeed a very fascinating one. And we see now also the rise of AI. I mean, the AI is all over the place. And people say that quantum could also take us sort of like to the next level of compute, right? But how do you see quantum computing relative to AI? Do you see it complementary, maybe competitive, or simply a different sort of like compute out there?
That's an interesting dynamics between quantum and AI. On the one hand side, quantum is benefiting from AI. So the way we stabilize the computer, which are still a bit fragile, and the way we correct the errors that happen in the algorithms can make use of AI and GPU-based compute. So there's a clear benefit for quantum computers from AI, machine learning, and GPU-based compute. But then it's also the other way around. There are quite a lot of algorithms that you would run maybe typically on GPUs that can benefit from quantum computing and can be accelerated. And this is why we strongly believe in a hybrid approach where you don't have quantum computers as a standalone system, but you have it integrated into the other compute modalities, GPUs and CPUs and the like, and they play together like in an orchestra. Each modality plays kind of the instruments that it's best at, and quantum computing is really good at solving very, very complex problems. But these problems don't need to be very big in size. Whereas GPUs, for example, you can feed a lot of parameters through the GPUs. And this is how these two technologies, for example, complement each other, and we are integrating quite heavily our quantum computers in data centers into kind of GPU and CPU-based compute.
It's for sure a new world altogether, specifically with cryptography. So just like taking quantum and bringing it there so it could break cryptography and all the Bitcoin world that we see now. So it's going to be interesting in the next decade or so. And okay, so you're based in Europe after all, and we've seen the rise of European very successful companies like, of course, you guys, but also Nebius, Mistral, and 11 Labs that emerged recently. But given that quantum is very much capital intensive, right? You need a lot of money in order to build a quantum computer. Do you believe that Europe could actually compete in this specific field against, let's say, the American one and even the Chinese and Eastern companies?
I do think so. Of course, you always need capital for such kind of businesses, but you need more than that. You need the best talent, you need the best research, you need the best innovation, you need to build ecosystems, also end users. And some of these aspects, we are still quite strong in Europe, especially on the talent side, if you think about the industry, who would be potential off-takers. And then on the capital part, it's not that we don't have capital in Europe. We just don't allocate it in the way that it's allocated in other regions of the world. And this is a mindset thing, right? It's about risk taking and where do you put your priorities. And I think this is something we need to change in Europe because the capital is there. And we managed to raise also larger rounds here. And this was mainly European capital actually that we raised. So it's really a mindset problem and it requires a mindset shift, but I'm quite convinced that actually we have the capital. But this doesn't mean also that we cannot take capital from other regions. So we have been blending in US capital in our funding rounds. In the end, it's a global business, a global industry and a global supply chain, which also requires global investments ultimately.
Speaking about investments, so we've seen just recently with IQM, right, the latest 50 million investments from BlackRock and the upcoming SPAC that we've seen on the news. But how does become, let's say, a public company change your R&D strategy and execution cycles? Because I guess once you're a public company, it's quarter after quarter that you need to meet the goals rather than quantum that could be very much research-wise.
Well, I think we have a very solid R&D plan and technology roadmap, which we keep on executing. What changes, obviously, is the way you report about your progress, because previously, maybe you just, whenever you made a breakthrough, you made a big announcement out of it, but you didn't care, is it now falling into this quarter or that quarter? So this means, obviously, on the communication side, we need to be a bit more diligent and more structured in the way we plan it. But we do, of course, have a very strong ongoing R&D effort and many kind of news and results coming out of it. So it's really just a question, how do you wrap this up? And then, of course, it's not only the technology, and this is really something that's very close to our heart, is also the commercial traction. So we have been selling quite a lot of deals around the world. And of course, this is also news that you can bring to the investment world, that you closed another deal, that you delivered another system, that you created another partnership. So I think there's lots of topics you can talk about. And I'm not concerned that we are kind of running short on the news side.
Obviously, IQM is the first one, I think, to sell a quantum computer to the private world. We'll get to it in a bit. But now when you talk with potential investors, are they interested more on the research side or they want to see commercial as soon as possible rather than only research-wise? I know that it's less related to IQM, but in general, are they interested also in development in the research side or not necessarily?
I do think many investors are getting very educated now in the field, and they have analysts which are very deep into the topic. So they want to see a credible roadmap and they want to see an ambitious vision of where the company goes on the technology side. So it is super important, obviously, to be very active and also thought leading in the way we build and design our quantum computers. So that's a must. But also, I think showing that you can build real products then from your roadmap. So you derive the products from your technology roadmaps and you start selling them, and there are people willing to pay money for this technology. I think this gives an extra level of confidence to the investors that they say, hey, this is not just a research project or a science project. This is actually a proper real business and the revenues are growing and you can build kind of financial models around this and you can discuss about profitability and margins and all of those topics.
It's very interesting indeed. And I want to shift the gears a little bit to your actual products and roadmap because it's interesting. If you look at other big quantum related companies out there, so of course, there is all the Google and IBM of the world, but they emphasize sort of like quantum as a service while you advocate for on-premise systems, right? Production of quantum, even saying that strategic infrastructure isn't something that you could rent. So I was curious, how do you see the European quantum market evolving around sovereignty and even ownership over this specific quantum world?
People are waking up, and many people have realized in this AI war, if you want to name it like this, that, hey, it is actually very tricky if we are fully dependent on a single supplier or sources from a single country, because they can just kind of turn it off and don't deliver anymore. So this is why I think there is an increased awareness of how supply chains work, and how sovereignty plays into all of this. And this plays into our card. It's not only in Europe, I think also many other places around the world which are kind of looking into where do they get the GPUs from, and then realize that, hey, we are quite dependent here. Let's not make the same mistake in quantum. So this is why actually we say, if you want to be sovereign in the choices that you make on the technology side, you need to come from a position of strength. And not only do you need to be able to kind of run and own the technology, you also need to be able to build the ecosystems around this. And this usually is done in computing. This is usually done where the deployments are happening. There are many examples in AI. Again, if you think about places like Cambridge or so, a lot of compute power was concentrated there. And you see all the startups gathering around it. And that's exactly the same dynamics that we now see also in quantum. Wherever we deploy a system, we do actually see new startups forming, other startups maybe moving there, industry engaging, academia engaging. And this is why it's so important actually to have the systems and own the systems and then kind of develop the IP on the systems and grow together with the technology.
The public market and also the private one very much appreciated of what you guys doing. But speaking about the ecosystem, do you think same as we have now GPU or TPU, we would have a QPU, a whole ecosystem around this? Or do you still think that quantum would be these big machines that you could still use, but I don't know if it's for the masses?
Computing, the way it develops is that we have compute power more and more centralized in data centers and less compute power, let's say, in our homes. Let's say if we use our smartphones or tablets or so, a lot of the compute actually happens in the data centers. And we realize if we go offline, how little we can do it because all of the compute happens in data centers. So this is how we think computing is developing more generally. And this means also quantum computing is going to happen in the data centers. And there it's not so much about having a very small form factor that would fit into your pocket. Actually, in the data centers, they work in 19-inch racks, right? And you see all the server racks there lined up. And this is how we have designed our quantum computers. Our quantum computers, from a footprint perspective, actually, they fit exactly into a 19-inch rack server setup. And this is how we are scaling up the systems. And this is how we would then define mass deployment, basically that each data center, each computing center has a quantum computer inside working together with the GPU and CPUs.
That's where the money is, I guess, right? And we just noticed that the sales of the 54 qubit Radiant system to the Poland Galaxy company, but it was described for all the audience out there as the first quantum computer sold to a private enterprise, which is amazing. But we're just wondering what changed in the market that now the commercial buyer invest instead of waiting for, let's say, a fault-tolerant quantum systems that are actually going all in from quantum.
Of course, it's still an investment into the future and an investment into the partnership and the journey that we do together with our customers. But I think it's two things. On the one hand side, seeing that the timelines are rather shortening than expanding. And the other thing is that we, not only we as a company, but also we as an industry, have been delivering on our roadmaps. So the trust is increasing in the technology, in the companies and people behind it. And then these companies say, okay, we have seen in AI how fast it can go and how long we need to prepare. And we want to be a first mover and we want to take the full advantage out of getting in early into the technology. And there are clear studies showing that if you get early into a new technology, actually you benefit more in the end. And I think this is the reasoning. People see that the roadmaps are being executed, are rather accelerating, they're gaining trust, and then they don't want to be late to the party.
You don't want to late to this party, right? It's an interesting one to be at. And okay, you also recently signed an agreement with VTT to deliver 150 qubits and 300 qubit system in 26 and 27, if I'm not mistaken. But for all the audience out there, what is the practical impact of this specific jump in terms of the capabilities? If you can describe it for the audience that might not be familiar with quantum capabilities.
So the big difference between a quantum computer and a conventional transistor-based computer is that it works based on quantum physics. So the transistors that we have, we call them qubits, like the quantum version of a transistor. And the compute power scales exponential with the processor size. Whereas with a normal processor, if you want to double the compute power, you need basically twice the number of transistors or 2 times the GPUs that you have. So it's really this exponential growth of compute power with processor size that makes the difference. And this is what ultimately unlocks all of those applications where we know today we will never be able to solve them with a normal computer. And there are very simple examples. If you think about simulating molecules in an exact fashion, you can show that already for decently sized molecules, you would need more transistors than we have atoms in the universe. So it's literally impossible to build such a machine based on a transistor-based computer, and you can do it with a quantum computer. Back to your question, when we grow the processor size, the compute power scales exponential. The challenge is that this is true in theory, but reality is also that these qubits, they still make errors all the time. So the error rate that we have at the moment is 1 in 1,000 or maybe 1 in 10,000, depending on the quality of the chip, which is very, very high compared to a transistor-based computer, which maybe only makes an error every billion or trillion computations or so. And this means we still need to correct these errors, which creates an additional layer and overhead. But overall, I think the meaning here is that already a 150 qubit system, you cannot simulate anymore with a big supercomputer. You're running out of memory and compute power. And I think this is the significance here, that you are entering new territory in compute power that you cannot explore anymore, even with the biggest supercomputer in the world.
It's very instrumental to be at two places at the same time. Okay, and the last question for myself, I want actually to do a deep dive into this bottleneck that you mentioned about error rate. Many experts argue that the true bottleneck isn't about the qubit count, let's say going from 150 to 1,000, so like 2,000, but rather error correction, as you mentioned. Where do you believe the real bottleneck, and where do you think we might be underestimated engineering challenge today?
I would be careful by wishing to be a qubit, because a qubit dies in very short time scale. So
No, so
maybe you don't want to do that. But
yeah.
no, jokes aside, this is exactly the reason why we need error correction, because basically a qubit dying means a bit flip, right? It was in the one state and it flips back to the zero state, but it's not supposed to flip. And we need to detect this. We need to kind of see the error, and then we need to correct it. But the challenge in quantum is that you're not allowed to look, because when you look, the quantum state also collapses. This is the Schrödinger cat example. So how to correct errors that you're not allowed to look at? And this is the complication in quantum, and there are works around it, but it creates a hardware overhead. This means on the chip, you bundle together many of these qubits to build a logical unit. And the question is, how many of these qubits do you need to put together to build a logical unit? And for many, many years, the gold standard was the so-called surface code. That's a specific way of doing this. But then researchers have found out that it's mathematically not the most efficient way to do this. And for example, in our case, we have been designing novel chip architectures, which are 18 times more efficient than the surface code. So with 18 times less qubit on the chip, you can achieve the same result. So there are still bottlenecks. I agree, we need to scale the hardware, but also I think we can become much, much more efficient also on the algorithmic side and the way we encode logic on the actual chips.
Interesting time indeed. And I remember actually we hosted Dorit Dodge. She was a checkpoint and she opened the venture capital specifically in quantum. Her background picture was quantum computer. You could actually see all the big refrigerator. Seems like milli Kelvin or something. So it's very cold out there. So probably not a good idea to be a qubit. So too much cold.
Yeah, I know Dorit well, and it's great to see that we have now even these kind of quantum-centric funds, right? It really shows that there's a whole industry emerging, because you can invest not only into computing companies like ours, you can invest into the whole supply chain, you can invest into sensing, you can invest into communication. So I think this is great that we're really building a whole industry around this.
Quantum and cyber at the same time. It could take us in terms of all the cryptography and hacking or even just defense to really places that we have never seen before. And okay, so Jan, thank you so much for answering all of my questions. So Jason, without further ado, the floor is yours. Take us home.
Thanks, Yossi. And Jan, been great listening to this so far. Quantum advantage, this notion of a point where quantum computers solve computational problems that are practically impossible for, modern supercomputers. What do you think the everyday applications that are emerging within chemistry, finance, logistics, like which would be the first to show a real measurable impact on the balance sheet, in your opinion?
I think These use cases also that you mentioned, they have been known for a while, and we know several algorithms to do this. And of course, there are still algorithmic improvements. And one simple way to think about this is use a quantum system to simulate another quantum system. This is how also Richard Feynman, a Nobel Prize winner, was thinking about it, that he said, if we want to simulate nature deep inside, we better make it quantum mechanical. And these are the use cases you would find in chemistry, material science. So for example, we have been deploying machines into supercomputing centers where we have been simulating the properties of molecules, and we reach what experts call chemical accuracy. So the results are actually there where it's needed by industry. Still, we are limited a bit in molecular size, but I think these will be probably the first ones. And it's really hard to say then in which order all of these use cases get unlocked. But as the hardware kind of grows and the computing power increases, more and more use cases will be unlocked. But I think the real beauty about quantum is not solving all of these use cases that we already know and talk about. This is kind of the baseline. But I think the real beauty will be all of those use cases that we don't even dream about, in a similar way that when people were kind of creating the internet, the first use cases were about sharing scientific data in a decentralized way. And nobody thought about video conferences and online payments and all of this. And I think quantum will have a similar effect, that there will be many use cases in the world that we don't even envision today.
Absolutely. And when it translates to the business impact, I guess what would be your prediction, like where you'd really see this top line performance improvements?
The example I gave, for example, molecular simulations, you would find applications in the pharma industry. And the pharma industry alone is spending hundreds of billions of dollars every year just for R&D. And this is because it's really hard, almost impossible to do the drug simulation on big supercomputers. And if you could do this on a quantum computer and you take this R&D spend and you cut it, let's say only if you cut out 10%, you already make a huge benefit. And in a similar way, if you think about now, everyone talks about AI and you can use quantum computers to create synthetic training data for LLMs. So all of the investment sums that are currently flowing into AI, if you only cut them by 1%, you already make a huge saving. And I think this shows that there's so big potential. Take whatever industry and whatever use case you want, there is a huge business impact in the end.
I think that example really exemplifies that. So I'm sure it's been all over your own feed and in the news everywhere around AI risks and, the cause for massive disruption. And particularly with regard to cryptography, it seems like the world is underestimating quantum's potential for disruption. So do you believe that there could be a ChatGPT moment for quantum where really it could transform certain industries, let's say cybersecurity, overnight?
Of course, in the cybersecurity, especially the code breaking, it's more a threat than like a beneficial use case. And I hope that the quantum ChatGPT moment is not the code breaking, but it's something more meaningful, like maybe a drug discovery or something like this. But of course, ultimately, this threat on the cyber side, this is one of the reasons why governments around the world are so engaged, because by no means they want to be losing this race, and especially in the geopolitical tension that we see between US, China, Europe, other players. It's very important, I think, that the technology stays in the hand of, let's say, a value-based society, so it's not used in the wrong way. And this is always the challenge with new technologies, because I think almost any technology you can use in a dual-use manner. And from this perspective, I think it's super important that in the Western world, amongst like-minded countries, we set standards, we set ethical guidelines also how we use it, and then we win the technology race so that we don't get into situations where others are there ahead of us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We want these powerful technologies in the right hands and with the right governance in place. And do you have a sense when, if at all, this ChatGPT moment might arrive? If I had to challenge you to prognosticate.
The code breaking, again, is an interesting example because it's so well studied, and obviously many people are thinking very hard about how to do it and how to optimize it. And the original algorithm came from Peter Shor, I think in 1993 or 94 or so. And back then, people thought that you would need 1 billion qubits on a chip to break RSA 2048. A few years later, there was an algorithmic improvement and the number was brought down to 20 million. And another few years later, I think the Google team brought it down to 1 million qubits. Now, a few months ago, there were a few other research papers bringing it down to below 100,000 qubits that you need to break RSA 2048. So there's a huge algorithmic development, and this makes it so hard to estimate exactly the timelines because we have, let's say, a well-prepared tech roadmap, and I can tell you when we tape out which processor of which size and quality. But if the algorithm requirement jumps by an order of magnitude, actually the timelines also move forward. They accelerate by several years. And I think this is what makes it so exciting, but also so urgent, actually, to act on the technology now.
And we're glad folks like IQM are doing just that. Well, Jan, I'm going to switch gears to some personal insights and rapid fire questions. Do you believe that quantum computing could ever become personal? You know, a quantum computer sitting on someone's desk, let's say within the next decade?
Whatever is possible from a technology side will happen. And it's not impossible to build such machines, right? We need to miniaturize a lot, of course, and develop the technology much, much further than where we are today. But it's not impossible to build such a machine. However, I'm not sure if we have such computers then on our desk. I think the way that the whole industry evolves is more that we as humans, we will have interface devices. Maybe we have kind of goggles or we have interfaces with our brain or so. And then we have centralized compute facilities which provide the compute. So I do think there is a world where we can have personalized quantum computers, but not so sure if they would sit under our desk, but maybe in a different way we would carry them around with us.
Yeah, I wonder. Maybe embedded in our body, who knows? I'd love to know, Jan, if there's anyone who stands out in your mind as an influential mentor who's thoroughly shaped your journey and your successes.
Yeah, of course, when you start such a journey and you come from a scientific background and like I'm a first-time founder, so I've never done it before, obviously you need to learn a lot and you need to listen to a lot of people who have much more experience in this. And I never had this like one single person, but I tried to have a network of people around me who I could ask because A, it's always good to get a second opinion, and B, it's also kind of good to ask people specifically around their core expertise. And I was very lucky in a way to have a network around me from the early investors and also other, let's say, business angels who opened me many, many doors. But I think the most important point is for founders to be actually open for advice because you're not kind of be the person that needs to solve everything yourself. And many, many things have been done in the past already, and you don't need to make the mistakes that others have done already in the past. So I think this open-mindedness and just listen to advice and take the advice, that's the most important thing here.
Jan, if you could have coffee with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be?
Well, I'm a physicist, so obviously Albert Einstein, I think, for me would be a great person because he was also living in very interesting geopolitical times. He was working on very exciting projects, which kind of groundbreaking technology from many aspects, and thinking very hard also about quantum physics. So for me, I think he would be a great person to have a coffee with.
Absolutely. And maybe when you put the two of your minds together, you'll reconcile quantum mechanics and our standard notion of physics. I have one last question before I pass to Yossi. If you were not leading IQM today, what career do you think you'd have pursued? Something maybe totally outside of tech?
Well, my original plan was to become a professor, and I was kind of going through my university career path, and then we decided to spin out the company. So this was the original plan. Of course, now I will most likely not kind of become a physics professor anymore. I'm too far out meanwhile. But I think the nice thing about having built a company is that you learn so many things, and you can basically do anything. So it's really hard to say for me what would be maybe a next adventure. But at the moment, also, I'm still very much excited to push IQM forward.
I did think of one last question just to get to know you a little bit more personally. Life outside of work at IQM, do you do anything to relax or to refill your cup?
I'm not the person that would kind of hang out at the beach all the time and just relax and do nothing. I get bored very easily. So I do lots of sports. I started running marathons. And then, of course, family and friends are super important, and they give me kind of the grounding and the feedback that I need also on the private side.
that's important. We need support in all aspects of our life. Well, thanks, Jan. That was fun, and I'll pass to Yossi to close off.
So, Jan, indeed, it was fun. But one last question, the hardest one of them all. What is your favorite movie of all time? Is it Oppenheimer? Because we saw a cameo of Albert Einstein there, or...
Yeah, of course, Oppenheimer is a great movie, and when I watched it, I saw some similarities. They are not trying to compare myself with him. Obviously, he was a great figure as well. I'm this kind of person. I often watch a movie and then I realize at the very end that I've seen it already at least 1 or 2 times. So I'm very bad actually in remembering what's happening in the movies. Which means I can watch movies many times, and always at the end I realize that I've seen it already.
Definitely. And I was just like wondering in that regard, when you see Oppenheimer or even Interstellar, many say that Interstellar could be very close to reality. Do you actually think, is it not as it's supposed to be, or you just like immerse yourself in the movie? Because you know how it's
I
supposed to be.
usually immerse into the movies. And the interesting fact is that many also of the science fiction movies, they have been very well researched, right? There's proper science behind it often, and they don't go totally crazy, usually, at least the good ones. And it's always interesting then also sometimes you learn from these concepts. So I try to immerse myself into the movies.
Well, maybe we'll see another movie about quantum. Could be interesting, though, without the refrigerator and all the millikelvin there. So,
Yes.
Jan, thank you so much for joining us. It's really been a joy. So thank you so much for joining us. And for all the audience out there, stay tuned. We have other interesting episodes from the Chief Operating Officer of Harvey, the President of Cisco. So it's going to be interesting. Stay tuned.